Before the sun had a name, before the oceans found their borders, there was only mist, endless, weightless and waiting. The universe was not yet a place of sound or color. It was an unfinished breath. And from that breath a thought began to form. Not human, not divine, but something between. In that stillness rose two beings of light and intention. Izanagi and Izanami. He who invites and she who is invited. They were not born of parents or time. They were motion in the void. Where they stepped, the air shimmered. Where they turned, the unseen took shape. From the bridge that floated between heaven and nothingness, they looked down upon a sea of chaos. Shapeless, endless, like a dream that had not decided what to become. Izanagi lifted a jeweled spear, its tip glistening with stars, and together they stirred the deep. When they drew the spear back, droplets fell and solidified into islands. From that sacred act, the first forms of Japan emerged. Rough, imperfect, alive. The sea calmed around them, as if relieved to finally see its reflection. The gods descended to this newborn land and began to create. Mountains rose where they placed their feet. Rivers ran where they turned their eyes. Forests grew from their laughter. It was a world that breathed for the first time. But creation is never only light. It carries the shadow of what must end. As the divine pair brought forth gods of trees, winds, seas, and stars, the rhythm of birth began to strain under its own brilliance. Every new spark demanded balance, a calm after the blaze. When Izanami bore the god of fire, the light was too fierce. It consumed her body, and for the first time, pain touched the divine. Her cries echoed through the island she had made, and the world trembled with grief. Izanagi held her as her form faded to ash, unable to understand how creation could demand such a price. When her light vanished, the sky seemed to grow heavier, as if mourning her absence. Unable to accept it, Izanagi set out to find her. Beyond rivers, beyond mountains, beyond the edge of what was living. He reached the Yomi, the underworld, a realm without sun or wind, where silence replaces time. There, he found Izanami, cloaked in shadow. She whispered to him, her voice fragile. "You came too soon. I have eaten the food of this land. I no longer belong to the world above." He begged her to return. She agreed, but only if he would not look upon her until they had reached the surface. Driven by love, he followed her through the halls of dusk, but doubt crept in. When he lit his torch to see her face, he saw not the goddess he loved but a form twisted by decay. The stench of death filled the air. Izanagi staggered backward, horrified. The spirits of the dead stirred and began to chase him, shrieking. He ran through the caverns, each step echoing his regret. Bursting into the daylight, he sealed the entrance with a massive boulder. That single act divided the realms forever, the world of the living from that of the dead. And when Izanami's voice rose again, it was no longer gentle. Her sorrow had become fury. "I shall take 1,000 lives each day," she swore. Izanagi, trembling but resolute, replied, "Then I shall give birth to 1,500. And thus, from their parting, the rhythm of life and death began, an eternal balance that even gods could not escape. But Izanagi was tainted by what he had seen. He could still feel the cold breath of Yomi clinging to his skin. He knelt by a river and began to wash himself clean. As the water ran over his face, something stirred. From each motion of cleansing, light was reborn. From his left I emerged Amaterasu, the radiant sun. From his right I came Tsukuyomi, the tranquil moon. And when he washed his nose, a storm broke loose, and from it came Susanoo, the wild wind, the tempest given form. 3 siblings, light, calm, and chaos. Born not from love, but from purification. They were the promise that even after loss, creation continues. They would become the balance of heaven itself. For a moment, Izanagi watched the sun rise for the first time and felt peace. The world was complete, though he knew it would never stay still. The sea sparkled below, the air shimmered with warmth, and the divine wind carried his last words across the waves. From sorrow let there always be renewal. When the first dawn rose, the newborn gods looked upon a world trembling between calm and storm. Mountains breathed steam, oceans still remembered fire, and the air itself seemed unsure whether to sing or to sleep. Amaterasu, born of light, stretched her radiance across the horizon. Her warmth kissed the peaks and filled the valleys with gold. Every river glimmered like a thread pulled from her robe. High above, her brother Tsukuyomi followed in quiet grace. His silver gaze cooled what her brilliance touched, tempering day with rest. And between them drifted the third, Susanoo, the restless one. He was wind made flesh, thunder shaped into motion. He loved the wild edge of creation, the crash of waves, the taste of salt, the roar of rain. Where Amaterasu built order, he sought freedom. Where she gave light, he found beauty in shadow. Together, they formed a trinity that kept the heavens alive: the sun, the moon, and the storm. But the balance was fragile, held only by the rhythm of respect. And when that rhythm faltered, heaven itself would tremble. Susanoo's heart was a sea of contradictions. He admired his sister's brilliance but envied it too. He mourned the mother he would never see again, still trapped in the dark beneath the earth. Every wind he summoned carried her memory. Every thunderclap was a cry he could not silence. He longed to prove his worth, to be more than the echo of another's light. The storm god's grief grew until it became rebellion. One day he stood upon the bridge of heaven, his hair whipping around him like black flame. "I will find her," he vowed. "I will bring my mother's voice back from the underworld." But the decree of the heavens forbade such trespass. Izanagi, his father, had already sealed that path forever. So Susanoo turned his anger toward the sky itself. He rose upward through clouds heavy with lightning until he reached his sister's realm. Amaterasu met him with cautious affection. Her golden eyes softened as she saw the turmoil in his face. "Brother," she said, "the storms within you shake the world. If you cannot master them, they will master all that we have made." But Susanoo only bowed and said, "Let me prove my heart." She agreed, though doubt flickered in her light. They began a ritual of reconciliation, each offering sacred tokens to test sincerity. Amaterasu took his sword and breathed upon it, creating radiant daughters. Susanoo took her necklace of jewels and crushed it in his hands, from which were born powerful sons. To him this was proof of purity. But when the heavens echoed with the cry of new life, jealousy whispered that her creations shone brighter. The storm within him broke. He tore down her rice fields, sacred and golden, the lifeblood of the heavens. He uprooted the divine trees and scattered their blossoms into the wind. He even hurled the flayed body of a heavenly horse into her hall, staining its walls with fury. The gods gasped, the clouds darkened, and the balance shattered. Amaterasu, stricken by grief and disbelief, withdrew. She fled into the cave of a Monoawado, a cavern deep in the heart of the mountains. There she hid her brilliance behind a massive stone, vowing never to shine again. And in that instant light died. The world plunged into shadow. Oceans turned to mirrors of ink. Fields froze, flowers closed, and creatures stumbled in endless night. Even the other gods grew pale, for without the sun, heaven and earth began to fade. The sky itself seemed to forget its color. For the first time since creation, silence ruled. It was not peace, it was absence. The gods gathered before the sealed cave, their divine voices muted by despair. One by one they spoke, pleading for her return, but their words fell like pebbles against a mountain. No echo came. No warmth answered. Then from among them stepped Amaterasu, goddess of joy and dawn. Her laughter was the one thing untouched by fear. "If sorrow cannot move her," she said, "then laughter will." She overturned a wooden barrel before the cave's entrance, scattered flowers upon it, and began to dance. It was no solemn ritual. It was wild and full of rhythm. She stomped her feet, swayed her hips, and sang with abandon. The gods could not help but watch. They began to laugh, hesitant at first, then freely, their voices rising like birds. From within the cave, Amaterasu heard something she had forgotten, the sound of joy. Curiosity pierced her grief. She pushed the stone slightly aside, and a sliver of light escaped into the darkness. The gods had prepared for this moment. They lifted a polished mirror and angled it toward the gap. When Amaterasu looked out, she saw her own reflection gleaming back at her. Radiant, alive, unbroken. The sight startled her. For the first time, she saw what the world had lost when she withdrew. A hand reached through the opening, strong, patient, and drew her out. Light burst forth, scattering the shadows like dust. The cave glowed with gold, the gods cheered, and the earth breathed again. Day returned, and with it, balance. The crops rose, rivers shimmered, and the divine order restored itself. Amaterasu forgave her brother, but only from afar. Susanoo, overwhelmed by shame, could no longer bear her gaze. He bowed before the assembly of gods, his voice trembling with both defiance and regret. "I will go," he said. "Let my exile be my atonement." And so the heavens thundered once more, not with anger, but with farewell. Lightning traced his descent as he fell from the sky, a comet of remorse blazing across the dawn. The gods watched until he vanished beyond the horizon. The wind that followed carried two messages, one of sorrow, one of promise. For even in exile, Susanoo would continue the work of creation in his own tempestuous way. And as the clouds cleared, Amaterasu stood upon the threshold of her restored light, whispering softly to the new day, "Let even storms find their sun." The heavens had spoken, and the storm was cast down. Susanoo fell like a comet through layers of cloud and thunder. Each gust of wind screamed his name, and each flash of lightning burned his regret into the sky. He landed upon the earth with a tremor that shook mountains and stirred the seas. The god who once walked among stars now stood in mud, surrounded by silence. The land before him was untamed. Vast forests of cedar swayed like waves of green fire, their roots drinking from rivers that glittered under a dim sky. It was the land of Izumo, where the wind spoke in the language of ancestors and every stone carried a whisper of divinity. Susanoo wandered for days, his divine strength ebbing, his heart heavy with the echo of his sister's light. The storm within him still raged, but now it had no sky to rule. He watched mortals toil and struggle, their lives fragile yet strangely full of purpose. In them he saw something he had forgotten: humility. They could not command the wind, yet they lived with it, planting, building, enduring. He began to wonder whether true power was not in domination but in balance. One evening, as the sky bled crimson, Susanoo followed the sound of crying. Beside a small river stood an old man and woman, their clothes torn, their faces streaked with tears. Between them knelt their daughter, a young woman with hair black as ink and eyes bright as morning dew. Her name was Kusanadaheim. When they saw the god, they fell to their knees. "Great One," the old man pleaded, "each year a monster rises from the river. It has 8 heads and 8 tails, and it devours one of our daughters. 7 have already perished. Tonight it comes again for the last." The storm god looked upon the trembling girl and felt a surge of emotion he had long buried. Here was innocence, awaiting sacrifice to the same chaos that once consumed his own heart. "Rise," he said gently. "No creature of darkness shall take her while I breathe." He asked for their sake and their faith, then began to plan. Susanoo cut long reeds from the riverbank and bound them into barrels. He filled each with sake brewed by his divine touch, strong enough to fell giants. He set them in a line, 8 in all, along the creature's path. Then he turned to Kusanadaheim and spoke softly. "Your beauty will tempt the beast. Let me hide you from its gaze." He touched her forehead, and she became a delicate comb, shimmering with divine essence. He placed her in his hair above his ear, so she might see through his eyes and witness courage. As the moon rose, the ground began to tremble. A hiss like boiling rivers filled the air, and from the mist emerged Yamada no Orochi, the 8-headed serpent. Each head burned with a different fire, each eye glowed like molten gold. Its scales were black as obsidian and slick with venom. It towered above the trees, its breath turning the air sour. The monster found the barrels and began to drink. Its tongues flickered, its head swayed. Slowly, the beast grew sluggish, its many voices merging into a single drunken growl. That was the moment Susanoo had waited for. With a roar that split the clouds, he leapt forward. His blade flashed, catching the reflection of the moon. He struck once, twice, 8 times, Each blow a thunderclap, each spark a star. The serpent thrashed and screamed, its blood turning the river crimson. Finally, with one last cry that shook the heavens, it collapsed. The storm was silent again. Only the whisper of water and the beating of Susanoo's heart filled the air. He wiped the blade clean, but the sword would not dull. It glowed faintly, humming like a living thing. Curious, he split open the final tail of the creature, and there, hidden deep within, he found a blade unlike any ever forged. Its edge shimmered with divine energy. This was Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword. He held it aloft, and lightning answered from the clouds. In that moment, Susanoo understood, redemption is not a gift. It must be carved from the very forces that once destroyed you. He raised his eyes toward heaven and whispered, "Sister, I return this light to you." When morning came, the old couple approached him with gratitude. Their daughter, now restored to her true form, bowed deeply. Her gaze met his, gentle, unwavering, and for the first time since his fall, Susanoo felt peace. He smiled faintly. "You have seen what I was. Now see what I must become." He left her in safety and began his long journey eastward, carrying the sword as both burden and promise. Each step cleansed him. Each gust of wind that followed was no longer a howl of defiance, but a song of purpose. And high above, Amaterasu watched from her throne of sunlight. She saw her brother walking among mortals, not as a god demanding worship, but as a protector learning humility. A quiet warmth crossed her face. Though they had not spoken, she knew his exile had become his redemption. When the sun rose over Izumo that day, the waves carried the scent of rain and renewal. The people of that land would later build shrines in his honor, calling him the storm that protects. The heavens remained distant, but balance had been restored. The wild god of thunder had found his peace, not in conquest but in compassion. And in the reflection of the river where the serpent had fallen, a faint shimmer of light lingered, perhaps from the sword, perhaps from something deeper. It looked almost like a smile. When word of Susanoo's deed reached the heavens, the skies themselves seemed to breathe again. The winds softened. The sea, long restless, became clear as glass. Amaterasu, radiant upon her golden throne, heard whispers carried by divine messengers. Stories of a serpent slain, of a village saved, and of a sword that shone brighter than lightning. She listened in silence. Pride stirred in her heart, though she did not yet call it forgiveness. Her brother had wounded heaven, but perhaps in mending the earth, he had begun to heal his own soul. It was then that Susanoo, humbled and calm, lifted the sword toward the sun. He offered it as a token of reconciliation, not a plea, but a promise. From the heavens came a light so brilliant it painted the waves gold. And from that light descended a voice, soft, resonant, timeless. "I accept this gift," said Amaterasu, "not as proof of worth, but as a reminder of balance." In that instant, heaven and earth aligned once more. The wind carried no anger, only harmony. Amaterasu took the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword, and placed it beside two other relics of divine origin. A mirror, perfectly polished, reflecting the soul of whoever gazed upon it, and a Magatama jewel, carved in the shape of a kama, the curve of eternity itself. Together they became known as the three sacred treasures, symbols not of conquest, but of virtue. Each carried a lesson older than kings and deeper than temples. The mirror, she said, is truth. It reminds mortals and gods alike to look inward before they judge the world. For in its reflection, one cannot hide from oneself. The jewel is benevolence, the grace that binds hearts, the compassion that turns power into purpose. And the sword is valor, not the hunger to destroy, but the courage to protect, even when hope is small. These relics would be passed down through generations, carried by emperors and priests, guarded in shrines that still whisper the breath of divinity. Yet their true strength lies not in their form, but in what they awaken. For those who live with honesty, empathy, and courage already hold these treasures within. Amaterasu looked upon the world she had once abandoned. The fields glowed again with life. Rivers sparkled under the sun she had reclaimed. The mortals worked, prayed, sang, unaware that their harmony was a reflection of the heavens. She realized then that the divine purpose was not to rule from above, but to keep the rhythm between all things alive. Creation, after all, was never meant to be perfect, only balanced. In the centuries that followed, the sacred treasures became more than relics. They became memory itself. When emperors took the throne, they did not claim divinity. They inherited responsibility. The sword represented the courage to lead. The jewel, the compassion to listen. And the mirror, the wisdom to see one's reflection in the people. Even in moments of war and turmoil, when kingdoms rose and fell, these symbols endured. They were not reminders of God's distant and unreachable, but of the divine within every act of balance, the decision to choose harmony over pride, empathy over wrath, reflection over blindness. Legends say that Amaterasu placed the mirror at Ise Shrine, where it remains to this day, hidden from mortal eyes. Only the priests who guard it may glimpse its light, yet they do not worship it. They tend to it, quietly, faithfully, as one tends a memory that must never fade. The jewel and the sword, too, became part of Japan's living heart. When the emperor performs sacred rites, these treasures are invoked, not as weapons or adornments, but as mirrors of the human spirit. They are said to hum softly when the nation stands in harmony and fall silent when discord grows. Perhaps it is myth. Perhaps it is truth. But even myth, when believed with reverence, becomes a kind of truth the soul recognizes. And so the gods withdrew from the stage of the world, leaving these symbols as their final words. To the heavens they entrusted eternity. To the earth they entrusted meaning. And to humanity, they entrusted the delicate art of balance. From that day, the people of Japan no longer saw storms as curses or sunlight as mercy. They understood that both were necessary, that light without rain cannot feed the fields, and rain without light cannot awaken the seed. Every festival, every harvest dance, every quiet prayer to the morning sun became a whisper to Amaterasu. We remember. In time, Susanoo's name, once spoken in fear, became a blessing. Sailors called upon him to calm the waves. Farmers invoked his name before the monsoon, asking that his tempests bring renewal, not ruin. His anger had become protection. His rebellion, wisdom. And in the hush before each dawn, when the horizon blushes gold and the air is still, the people say the two siblings speak once more. Not in thunder, not in light, but in the soft rhythm of wind brushing over rice fields. Their eternal dialogue, strength and compassion, storm and sunlight, the heartbeat of creation. Through these treasures that rhythm lives on. A mirror that reminds the soul to see itself. A jewel that binds hearts through kindness. A sword that defends what is sacred. They are not relics of the past, but blueprints for the future. An ancient promise that as long as humanity seeks harmony, the gods will never fade. For the divine, as Amaterasu came to understand, is not found in the unreachable sky, but in the reflection of light upon water, in the patience of a craftsman, in the smile of one who chooses peace. Centuries rolled forward like waves upon the same eternal shore. The names of gods softened into songs, and the songs became stories whispered around firelight. Children learned of Amaterasu's cave not from scrolls or sermons, but from the way sunlight spilled through clouds after a storm. The myth was no longer distant. It was alive in every dawn. The people of Japan built shrines not to worship what they could not see, but to remember what they already felt. Wooden torii gates rose at the edges of forests and along the coastlines, marking the invisible threshold between the seen and the unseen. Wind chimes rang like laughter of unseen spirits. Lanterns glowed at night, not to ward off darkness, but to honor its place beside the light. Every element of their world became a reflection of the gods' dialogue. The rain was Susanoo's breath. The sunrise, Amaterasu's smile. The gentle tide that kissed the shore, Tsukuyomi's silent blessing. Through this quiet language of nature, the ancient rhythm continued. It was no longer about divinity watching from above, but about humanity walking in step with the divine, an understanding that the sacred is not distant but cyclical, pulsing within every heartbeat of creation. Over time, the myths intertwined with life itself. In spring, the cherry blossoms spoke of renewal, a promise that beauty can be brief and still be infinite. In summer, the storms reminded people that chaos too can cleanse. In autumn, the falling leaves taught the grace of letting go. And in winter silence, they remembered the cave, that even in stillness, light prepares to return. To the scholars and storytellers of later centuries, these tales were more than folklore. Anthropologists traced in them memories of floods, eclipses, and shifting lands. Fragments of ancient history wrapped in metaphor. The tale of the sun goddess hiding away mirrored the moment an eclipse turned day into night. The serpent Orochi might have been the memory of a great river's flood, winding through 8 tributaries. Each myth, they said, was a seed of truth wrapped in poetry. But the people who told these stories were never trying to define the world. They were trying to feel it, to place meaning between what could be known and what could only be sensed. For myth is not the opposite of truth. It is truth told through emotion. It carries the wisdom logic cannot hold, that loss can bring life, that destruction can create beauty, that even the storm serves the sun. The balance that Izanagi and Izanami began, that Amaterasu and Susanoo tested, continues even now, in every act of creation, in every reconciliation between light and shadow. It lives in the human spirit's need to begin again. In modern Japan, the myths remain, not just in museums or textbooks, but in gestures and words. When someone bows before a shrine, they repeat a movement older than time, an echo of Izanagi bowing to the rising light. When the first sun of the year rises on New Year's Day, families gather to greet it. They call the custom Hatsuhanode, the first sunrise. And as the horizon turns gold, the sky seems to whisper Amaterasu's name once more. Even in cities of steel and glass, where neon lights drown the stars, the ancient pulse persists. You can feel it in the hush before dawn, when the trains have not yet stirred, and a single ray of sunlight slides between the towers. For a brief moment, time folds. The distance between myth and life disappears. You realize that these stories were never meant to be confined to the past. They were written in the architecture of existence. Every person carries a piece of the divine trinity within them. A spark of Amaterasu's light, the drive to create, to illuminate. A whisper of Tsukuyomi's calm, the instinct to pause to see. And a shadow of Susanoo's storm, the courage to break, rebuild, and rise stronger. To live fully is to let all 3 dance within you. Even the sacred treasures, the mirror, the jewel, and the sword, are not relics locked away in shrines. They are reflections of human virtues that endure wherever life is lived with balance. When someone chooses honesty, they polish the mirror. When they act with compassion, the jewel shines brighter. When they defend what is right, they lift the sword once more. This is the true inheritance of the gods, not immortality, but continuity. They do not demand worship. They ask remembrance. Not through ritual, but through harmony. In the end, myths survive not because they are believed, but because they are felt. They live where logic cannot reach, in the hush of awe, in the breath caught before wonder, in the quiet knowledge that life is both fragile and eternal. Perhaps that is why, after thousands of years, people still tell the story of Amaterasu and Susanoo, because it is not just about gods. It is about us. About how we hide from our own light when the world wounds us. About how laughter and courage can bring us back into the sun. About how even the most violent storm can clear the sky for a new beginning. At dawn, when the first light touches the sea, the world feels ancient again. The same sun that rose for the first gods rises for us. The same ocean that received their tears still glimmers with gold. And somewhere, beyond sight but never beyond reach, the divine siblings continue their endless conversation. The sun and the storm, the light and the wind. Not as deities upon thrones, but as the eternal pulse between shadow and shine. The rhythm that keeps the world alive. And so the legend endures. Not written in stone, not carved in temples, but reflected in every sunrise, every wave, every heart that dares to seek balance. Because the story of creation never ended. It simply became the story of living.